cannot hear him.
Okay, now, how about now?
I cannot hear him.
Turn it up a little louder.
Okay, testing. Is
Go
that,
ahead.
how's that? Okay, that works, great.
That's great.
Okay, we'll be starting in 60 seconds. Within 60 seconds.
Within the 60 seconds, yeah. My dog has got the other part of it.
All right, so, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, Lynn, they tell me we can now start. So we said we would be here the day after Christmas, and we are. That itself is a bit of an achievement given that Barack Obama still in the White House. We'll go right into discussion. I'll ask Lynn first of all if he has something to tell us before we begin. Lynn, you want to start us off, or should we go right to the questions?
Well, I think we can just go to this issue right now, because we have to recognize the fact that what we achieved in Manhattan area in particular, but other musical things have occurred recently, that these things are extremely important and they have to be understood in terms of the placement as the voice, which has just been a matter of discussion. The placement of the voice is very crucial in making people enabled to understand how to express ideas. And this is an extremely important thing, and since we've been doing this right now, rehearsing this, as on this immediate occasion, it's very important to get this kind of placing of the expression of the voice of argument. The voice of argument. And you've got to get the emphasis on the right syllable. And I think that will be a little thing we should do now.
Okay, very good. So let's start with the first question.
Happy New Year, Lynn. This is Leo from the Bronx, and I'd like to know what repercussions would happen if Puerto Rico should default this January 1st, and would the vulture funds have try to do anything, or what?
No, the whole thing is a cheating operation. The whole thing is a fraud. And there's no reason to imply that. Now, there are two levels of the fraud. One is the fraud per se. And the fraud per se is the argument of what the owes to the other economy. The other thing is to what should be done to steer the economy of Puerto Rico, to get that to function in a way which intrinsically is an accurate representation of the intention which is to be realized. One thing is the fraud. The fraud is there, and everybody is talking about what is in effect the fraud, which is the fraud against the people of Puerto Rico. And the second question is, what should we do to supply a direct operation, designed operation, to meet the challenge of the purpose of the Puerto Rican community? I can't hear you.
Good afternoon. Oh.
Good afternoon, young lady.
Hi, this is Jessica from Brooklyn. I'm seeing what I'm thinking of as a mobilization to support the Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton. I received a letter in the mail from my union people, the UFT, and there's a caucus of the UFT that is pretty much run by the executive board that is there now, Mulgrew and his crew. That's what I call him. And call them, and they steer the General Assembly or the Delegate Assembly that I'm a member of. They're steered by this caucus, which is, you almost have to be invited to be in that caucus. And I was invited a while ago when I first became a delegate, not even knowing that this was like a steering thing. So we received this letter December 30th. We're supposed to have an emergency meeting to discuss the candidate that we have endorsed, Hillary Clinton. So I see that then when we start school again, the General Assembly or the Delegate Assembly will be steered into rallying behind this candidate. And I'm wondering why this sudden, push to get us all the ducks in a row, or the sheep, so to speak, and support this particular candidate when she seems to be faltering, and people are picking up on pandering, for instance, to the Hispanic community. People are saying that she's doing this, So I'm wondering if you would comment on that, because others in our group may be seeing these things in their unions or their locals or other organizations. This is definitely something that was a red flag for me.
I understand that. It is a real red flag for me, too, because Hillary is actually an agent of Obama. And what she's doing is sacrificing everything that she pretends to do, and she's actually a slave of Obama. And she probably should get herself all decorated up and so forth and wear a costume, which would help people to understand what's going on. Now, I don't know what an Obama costume is, and I don't want to find out what it is. I just want to have the whole issue removed from the scene.
So when I go to this meeting, you can hear me?
Can't hear. I'm losing the voice.
Try again. Turn it up.
So when I go to this meeting, I should be like an intervener and have a whole lot to say about this particular candidate and what we really need to do, which is Glass-Steagall.
That's right. Exactly. Glass-Steagall.
Right.
Hey, don't do such that. Don't shut her off. Don't shut her voice off. You can't hear.
Okay.
They shouldn't shut her voice off.
I didn't hear what he said.
He said they shouldn't shut your voice off.
Oh, okay.
I didn't hear. Your voice dropped off. Somebody executed your voice, and I thought that was unjust.
Thank you.
Happy holidays to everybody. I'd like to add that this is only the second time I've been here. I'm new to New York to a certain degree, 3 years. I'm in a shelter in Bronx. Most of my experience has been out of the country. Long story short, in my evaluating things from over the last 50 years in travel, seeing different cultures, measuring what I've learned from their interactions. The only basic thing that I see to achieve anything directly to have an impact on BRIC, which I was told existed from your development and concept, was to get an agenda to nationalize education. To me, that is the core problem of economics and class. So I think my mentality, as it's been for over the years, is to pursue that channel. Voting for whomever doesn't change anything because these people have their own networks, their own concepts, and it's creating a catastrophe throughout the world. So to spend energy to remove an individual, to me, is not really the best strategy. The best thing is to find an agenda that nobody can say no. And nobody can say no to a balanced education that's nationalized, that make everybody equal and taste the same thing. If you want to deviate, you can do that in addition to the core. But we're falling behind because we do not have the quality of mentality to be able to run a country without people playing the ping pong game with politics.
Well, that's true, but I would question what your appreciation is of the problem. Because the point of fact is you don't want to have a standard educational program. And we're talking about an educational program because that's the educational program is the thing that defines what people are able to understand. That is really understand in principle. Now, what has happened in the course of the 20th century and beyond, remember, we're now beyond the 20th century. We're in the 20th century plus, and the 20th century plus is characterized by idiocy. So we don't want to get into the idiocy department. But no, mankind does not understand mankind himself. There is a higher standard which must be applied. The higher standard is defined by the fact that mankind is, people believe that their body talks for them. And it's the mere use of the voice of that body that defines them. Well, that ain't true, because mankind is not something on earth. Mankind is not intrinsically unearthly. Now we live biologically, conveniently, in that kind of medium. But the secret of mankind's progress, and this is what the question is, what are the changes in behavior that must be introduced to enable mankind to reach the levels of achievement which mankind urgently requires? And therefore, what you need to do is we need to take the whole school system down in its present form, because the school system, as I experienced it, even as a child, was rot and nonsense. And the only reason I had some intelligence was because I didn't believe in any of that garbage that I was taught to speak. And therefore, the question is, mankind is not an earthling. Mankind's destiny belongs to the galaxies. It belongs to the astronomical system, away from Earth as such. And it's the ability of mankind to see what the future of mankind is in terms of higher planets and things of that nature. And therefore, what you have to do is develop the creative powers of humanity, not how to imitate some kind of jazz.
Thank you very much for all that jazz.
Hello, Mr. LaRouche. It's Howard from New York. And also, I wanted to talk today because recently I was in Guatemala along with my wife, and we had the opportunity to meet some of activists who watch these programs. And I had to come back early, but my wife still had time to meet a fellow, Mr. Montoyo, who actually is known as the Guatemalan astronaut. And it was a very interesting story because he put video evidence that he's been to the North Pole, the South Pole, he's been under the sea, and he actually went to a NASA contractor for training to go in the NASA space program. Unfortunately, as we all know, there currently is no manned NASA space program, but Mr. Montoyo had the idea to petition to get into the Russian space program. And at that time last year, the president of Guatemala, Otto Perez, facilitated this by having the foreign minister discuss this with Mr. Lavrov. So I just wanted to give you this story because, unfortunately, after that, there was a slander campaign against this fellow, and the government of Guatemala ended up getting arrested by some strange judicial hit squad. But, you know, we know that a lot of bad things are happening in South America and from Guatemala down to Argentina. But what I wanted to bring up is are there targeting operations? Well, or what is the status of targeting operations against both so-called leftist governments in South America or anybody who wants to deal with the BRICS, who deals with Russia, who deals with China's Silk Road? And what do you think about this operation tending probably internationally to isolate Russia and to isolate China?
Well, I think the first thing you have to look at is what happened in the 20th century with Bertrand Russell. And Bertrand Russell was himself a satanic creature, a very satanic creature. But he was typified by the whole British legacy and by the things, the evil things that followed that period, the earlier period. And therefore, there are only a few well-known people in earlier history who have any comprehension of this. And so the problem is we have to actually develop a system of practice. Now, I mean a scientific principle of practice, which is an accurate, validatable measure of how we should organize our thinking and speaking in terms of a principle of practice, which is based on the need for the progress in development of the powers of mind of the individual human being. And that is what's not achieved. People come up with a map, say this is the map that fixes this, but the point is the history of mankind is mankind changes its own opinions of itself. And some of them goes down, some of them become stagnant, and some of them, few of them, actually progress. And what we want is a progressive system where man looks at the solar system, as with Kepler, looks at the galactic system today, and looks at the higher system beyond that, and says the universe is higher than we know. The universe has potencies which are more important than we know. Our job is to discover what those things are and to practice them as scientific practice. And we need an education system which is based on that devotion.
Do you have any comments on this thing with Russia and China and the space program and what's?
I'll tell you what now is right now the world is divided. We have in Asia, minus a couple of fringe areas, we have a case where progress is in motion. We have in the rest of the world, the transatlantic world, and fringes of that, we have backwardness, we have degeneration, we have rot. We have something we've got to get rid of. We've got mankind must progress. Man must inherently progress, not by inventions, but mankind must progress in the sense of getting superior abilities of mankind in dealing not only with Earth as such, not only beyond, not only in the galactic system, but beyond. And what we aren't even studying anymore since Obama. We aren't even studying the system of Earth, or the system of the moon. We're not even on the moon. We're lunatics, but we're not on the moon. And this problem is what we have to deal with.
Hi, Lynn. This is Marcel in Manhattan. And you've already referenced in the first few questions, I think, so far, the idea of education. And as a teacher, as a high school English teacher, my question deals with the use of classical material in the classroom. Now, we're, I think, still fortunate that we are able to teach Shakespeare on a regular basis. It's required at every grade level. We have the ability to teach Edgar Allan Poe and Harper Lee and other works that I think are very, very useful. Now, my question, though, is more about the use of these materials. For example, with our seniors, we're currently doing Hamlet, which I think is very, very good because, of course, we start out by talking about the principle of the play itself is the aspect of the cause of every man-made tragic episode of history, every Holocaust that's occurred in the history of humankind where a person, a character has the ability and the awareness and the knowledge to be able to do something, but then does not act and does not understand clearly enough to see through to be able to do that. As an example, we are right at the point in the play where Hamlet, speaking with his mother in the bedchamber, And the question we discussed in the last class before the break was, well, why is Gertrude not able to see the ghost of King Hamlet? And we talked about the idea of the ghost as Shakespeare using this principle on the stage to communicate the classical idea of immortality, that Gertrude cannot see the ghost because in fact Hamlet is not showing her former husband, Hamlet's father, so that she can remember him, so that she can see him, in essence seeing him with her mind, and therefore conveying the principle of seeing him with her eyes for the purposes of the stage. And so I think these works, things like this, are very, very useful. And we're looking to get to the graveyard scene, which again shows Hamlet's fault in not being able to understand the idea of immortality, the value of continuing to enable the kingdom to live, the idea that ideas are more powerful. I guess my question would be in all of this, this is very, very useful, but given that this crisis is right on top of us now, and given that the students, for all of their wonderful curiosity and intellect and everything that they bring to us, are not really aware with any scope of what the problem is. So how can we use these particular ideas from the classical works most effectively in order to get them to see and to act in the ways that they can very, very quickly under these circumstances?
Well, I would tell. What is this? Okay, anyway, you've got a couple of cases here. You've got, first of all, you've got Brunelleschi. Now, Brunelleschi is probably the foundation of all modern classical art. Now, that leads into other things. It leads into the work of Kepler. It goes beyond Kepler and goes into, and at the same time, it goes into Shakespeare. Shakespeare's greatest work was actually a humanistic view. It was not a playwright view, not a drama as such. It was much deeper. And if you look at the whole work of Shakespeare, you find you're reaching into something which is much broader than any simple playwright design. This is an insight into the nature of mankind. And you have other cases of these cases of steps of progress, of scientific progress. And that progress is what we should actually be teaching people in schools to become acquainted with modern history. And you start there where? With Brunelleschi, because Brunelleschi was the greatest scientist of that time. He had made more inventions, more creation. So you start with that, then you go with other higher levels of people who follow him. You run into Shakespeare, and Shakespeare very soon plays a very important role. And it's not just a playwright. It's a conception of the study of the nature of man and man's future and destiny. Then we go from there, we go into the other aspects of the struggle, which always must try to get ahead of what mankind has achieved so far. But we depend largely on that, and that's for education of children, education of students, is to give them an extent of a process of history, and to be able to explain what that thing is, and to get people to respond and see insight into what these things really meant. And what you're talking about is, I think, is what you're saying, that question. And that question is a very important one in terms of the educational process. But I think going deeply into at least modern history, which as with the case of Brunelleschi, who was really the first systemic scientist in modern history, was he. And so if you start from him and what his, the great period of the Renaissance, and you go into that, and you said this period of evil, and Shakespeare was living against a period of evil in his century. And they explain that, and then you say, what's the lesson that we as students or children have to learn to begin to understand what all of this means. And what you're doing is in that direction. And I think that's precious for that reason.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. How are you? Okay.
Ah, my friend.
Yes, my question is, why this president being so reckless, violating the Constitution and doing a lot of things that he's not supposed to be doing? He says that he's going to govern the country with the executive order with a pen on the phone. You know what I mean? He says that he don't care about the Congress, and he goes through the Congress, he goes through everything, he does whatever he wants. That means he's a violation, right? So why he's not impeached? Clinton did less than that. He got impeached. And then this Obama is violating a lot of law. He's doing a lot of crazy things. And he's not impeached. He's not supposed to be in office. He's supposed to be out of office as soon as we can. That's what I'm here for.
Well, I would say that Alexander Hamilton is actually the lays out the physical principle of science for mankind. And so you rely on Alexander Hamilton as a model. And if somebody comes up with another line of question, you say, what about Alexander Hamilton? What did he do and what did he say? What was his policy? What were the four principles on which he based his construction of the United States as a system? Nobody pays attention to it that much, right? But if you paid attention to the four principles of Alexander Hamilton, you would find you don't have a mystery that needs to be solved. We need to examine the skulls of people who are not thinking in those terms, like they do in Manhattan now. We have the common area of Manhattan with all these skyscrapers and these nuts running around and various kinds of cults like so forth. And we should just get rid of those things and understand that what Alexander Hamilton laid out as a system in terms of his development during the period of preparation of the presidency, and that's the standard that you can use, for example, for reference. You don't need to deal with any of these kinds of things. They're gimmicks, they're gadgets, they're not truth. And most people aren't even educated to understand what Alexander Hamilton meant. Most members of Congress have no understanding of the principles on which the United States was founded, which are Alexander Hamilton's, on economy and culture. So what we need is to go back to what Alexander Hamilton typifies most efficiently. And if you look at it, the number of presidents who have been presidents, very few of the totality of the presidents has had any connection whatsoever with the principles on which the United States was based, as Alexander Hamilton typifies that principle. So that's what you need to do. We need to change the thing, get rid of the garbage, go back to the primitive sense of earlier history, and look at these things carefully from the standpoint of the critical value which is supplied by Alexander Hamilton. Huh? What's his laws?
Let's see what we're going to do. Hi, Lynn. Alvin here in New York, and I wanted to tell you about the experience we had distributing the latest flyer you put out massively Christmas Eve in New York City on 5th Avenue in front of St. Patrick's Church, the Rockefeller Center, which is the last place on earth I would ever wish to be on Christmas Eve, especially with nice weather. But we had this to do. And you're in front of St. Patrick's Church, but it's really a militarized area when you're there. I mean, guys were really, this wasn't just the NYPD there, and full regale. So you're there to celebrate Christmas in an entertaining sense, yet there's a SWAT team there as well. So that's pretty ironic. And a throng of people that at first my reaction is, what could we possibly do here? There's just too many people. Well, I think we got a lot done. And in the midst of all that chaos, it showed that reality and truth can interfere and even stop. I don't have numbers, I don't really have a report, but there were a lot of flyers being taken from people. And I had several discussions, made contact, and one of the best comments I heard from a new contact I made was a very simple statement: I have a lot to learn. And we're in a period now where I think if we do our job, they can learn and understand rapidly, since we're under a very short time constraint here, to begin to assimilate, as Shelley would say, so that we can then move forward. Because I think the block on Obama, when you're out there telling people while they're doing their Christmas kind of stuff that the banks are ready to go, chaos is on the way, you have to act now for Glass-Steagall, that was having an effect. And so while at first I really was saying, what the hell are we doing out here, it turned out to be very, very timely and important. We've got another short week. I know that there aren't a lot of interventions, I believe, for us to have an influence on, but the streets of New York are alive and available to us.
Okay, I would call you to the...
We're getting an echo.
You get the echo out of the way so we can... I'm not talking against myself in some cute way. Now, there was, if you look at what was in this schedule today, now it came from, actually was presented by Tony Pappa in his report. And there were 8 paragraphs in that report which are actually quite charming in the sense that they cover the issues most crucially. And I think we should look at that thing, the description of that, and realize that what we have done and what we've understood leads in the direction of finding the answers for what we should be questioning. And Tony Pappa has done an excellent job. It was dated for this Saturday event. And I think that schedule, which he prepared for Saturday, the Saturday event, and it's now circulated, and that has presented the concept of what really is needed to understand what's wrong with the world around us today.
Hello. Nope. Okay, now it's good?
No, he can't hear it.
Nope. Still not going?
Fine.
Now it's going, now it's going. Okay. So, as most of the people in the room attended last weekend, we had these concerts of the Messiah, which are a certain, hopefully a pivot point to an upshift in our cultural intervention in Manhattan and around the country. And I'll just put out a couple thoughts that I'm thinking about it and open the floor for Lynn to continue in whatever way you see fit. One thing that I'm thinking about playing a certain role in responsibility for the vocal training in this project is I was somewhat shocked last summer when we were going to choral activities throughout New York City, which I thought was a cultural capital of the country. And we went to an event of a congregation of many secular choruses who all sang together, the Verdi Requiem and the another one, Gloria, Vivaldi's Gloria. And I was shocked to find out that most of the people in the room couldn't sing. And these are the New Yorkers who know everything about music, and yet why anyway. So it's a certain and then one of the responses that we frequently have gotten from, for example, our professional tenor who sang with us over the weekend is, isn't this impressive that the chorus sounds good but hasn't paid any ringers to sing in the sections? So where most of the choruses, if they're going to sound good, they have to pay a handful of good singers that travel from chorus to chorus to chorus, because what's happened is the culture has been so destroyed over the decades. The music people listen to, what they think is the music they like, what they think is the music that's good, has been so destroyed that the standard has collapsed. And as we hopefully most of us are aware of, it's not in the schools anymore. The music program has been stripped from the schools. So my sense is that you address that in two ways. One, through changing the tuning to the Verdi tuning, which facilitates a much greater ability for the voice. Two, returning to the bel canto tradition as best as we can. You know, it's an art, it's a science. There's a question of experience that you may or may not be able to read from a book. But the other part is to uncover a certain social reality of popular opinion. The other response that I got a lot in speaking to people after these events, whether they were laymen in the audience or musicians, was the shock at how many people came to our events. That they were sold out, that people were overflowing. You had 1,000 people at these two events, because what people will say to you one-on-one in private is complaints about how no one likes the good music, no one is willing to go out of their way to go to concerts. You know, I'm the only one, and everyone else likes the crap culture. And so they were shocked at what we were able to do this weekend. So those are some of what I'm thinking about. So anyway, to uncover that most people don't like the ugliness of the culture, and that when you take action on it, as we did last weekend, you can demonstrate principles of the music, but then a social principle as well.
Yes. And what's the point? The point is we had the two events on Saturday and Sunday. The two events were totally successful. I was, paid very close attention to every bit of that experience. It was absolutely excellent. The overall thing was actually taking us back to what had been actually the greatest classical music of the 19th century and into the 20th century, but especially the 19th century. So the 19th century, in terms of art, in terms of artistic expression, this kind of thing, and music as such, particularly classical musical performance, large audience. This is the most appetizing thing that people could ever get close to. Now, you find this in certain parts of France. I don't like this intestinal attitude of the French when they speak their language. The German is acceptable when it's a good choice, and the Italian, the classical Italian, is excellent. And when people speak in the classical Italian or a classical version of German literature and so on, the music, it's different. And French is intestinal problems, has intestinal problems in trying to speak it, and so forth. So the point is that the natural thing of mankind and the history of mankind in modern history shows that the value of artistic expression, not simply as something this is my style. It's not my style. It's the communication of ideas which are unique And those unique ideas are what the merit is. There is nothing wrong. There is nothing short. This is what I heard on Saturday and Sunday. Nothing wrong with that. What all there was is a weakness in the fact that it could have been better if we'd had more people who had the talent to get that better quality. But despite that, the Saturday and Sunday event were in themselves delightful, in the truest sense of delightful. And what you need to do is spread that. It's when you get out in the gutters, where people are licking in the gutter ditches or something, that's where you get the problem. And people like popular music. And popular music means that they're not functional. It means that they're not reliable. They can't be believed. They are not to be believed because they don't have any truth in the character of their speech. They're uttering something or guttering something, not expressing concepts, human concepts. And so we shouldn't let anybody get by with the kind of political murder that goes on in terms of today's popular opinions.
Good afternoon, Mr. LaRouche. Rod here. When I say shut down Wall Street, I try to explain that Wall Street is bankrupt, that we need to come across Glass-Steagall. I say come up against a denial that most people are into, and people don't want to hear about it. A couple of people heard from me more than once about this. Can you speak to a tactic that will help me get across that Wall Street must be shut down?
I would say shut down Wall Street and shut down the president, first of all. Oh, yeah. He's being shut up. He's being...
Across. That's, yeah.
No, the voice was shut down in your remark.
Yeah.
And they didn't pull it up fast enough to get it to convey what you said to me. I wasn't able to hear it because they shut the thing off by trying to cut it down.
Yeah.
I guess go repeat it. Just say what you want to say. I want to hear it.
I've done a lot of explaining, and there's a density factor out there, you know. I mean, I'm dealing with a lot of people that have no background at all. I mean, even some of them allegedly attended a university, but I have to explain to them, hey, there was a depression in 1929, you know, there was this, there was that, you know. It's like I'm constantly conducting class, as it were. And this is part of the problem, getting people on board. I do try to push our website, you know, to try, because that's something that this generation will do, hopefully, you know, when you get them to do it. And that sometimes I feel might help, you know. But I like, if there's some other option that you can think of that I could, something I could do besides, you know, hit them in the head, shut down Wall Street, you know?
Uh-huh. Well, you got Horatio Alger, remember? I don't think you were that old to know that, but I knew about it. My father had exposed me to Horatio Alger's stories, and I never liked them very much. My father kept telling me I should like these things, not because he liked them, because he didn't like them, but he thought it was his duty to impose that on me. and I didn't like that at all, ever. So those kinds of things have come up. Now, what happened in the beginning of the 20th century, and you've got to look back very closely at the 20th century, and you have to look at what happened then. There was a change in the policy of behavior. Why? Because the great presidential leader had been assassinated, and we had a whole century, a full century of an idiot, and we got that with one case exception, with real idiots. We went through the 1920s, and except for one person who was poisoned, allegedly for taking oysters in the middle of the desert, which is a dubious question. But since then, until Franklin Roosevelt, we didn't have a decent cultural standard supplied to the people of the United States. Now, then we had Franklin Roosevelt, and Franklin Roosevelt was a man who represented the United States, the people of the United States. He actually raised people who had been depressed in their practices and so forth. He inspired people in the question of World War II and the effects of that period. Then we had, of course, a couple of great military leaders who, in retirement, who were also centers for this. But then we had the FBI, and the FBI destroyed the ability of people to think. That was their specialty. Poison people. So the issue here is, how do we locate a program that comes up with what she said earlier, the kind of program we require to enable our people to communicate among one another in a manner which is civilized by our standards. Not only to be civilized in terms of the past, but to be civilized about approaching what has to be yet accomplished, which has not yet been designed and accomplished. And if you have a mind that is able to work that way, to say, yes, well, this is what my grandfather told me, this is what my father told me, and you say, well, but we don't want just that. We want to go beyond the grandfather and the father. We want to go into the new generation of young people who are going to become the youth, who are going to organize the future of society. And that's been taken away from us to a large degree. You have people who are gripers, they're called gripers, who protest against that kind of problem and demand progress in mankind's growth. We demand scientific progress. We demand the landing on the moon. We demand going beyond that in terms of these kinds of things. So the galactic system, we don't call ourselves earthlings. We say we're human. We're not earthlings. We represent a higher form of society, which we are coming into by conquering the moon, by conquering the solar system, as Kepler did that for us. It's by understanding the galactic system on which the water supply of the human species depends. And therefore, we want those kinds of things, not the old hat, which is full of bugs. A hat is full of bugs. It needs to be fumigated.
Thank you.
Mr. LaRouche, this is Rick from Bergen County, New Jersey.
Yes.
I was glad to hear Marcel talking about his class on Shakespeare. I have some interaction with the educational system, and there was I just wanted to relate a little story. I was talking to one of my students this morning, and there's a standardized test taken by most students in the United States who intend to go to college called the SAT. I don't know if you're familiar with it. The letters apparently don't stand for anything. I wanted to bring this up because I was really struck by the topic. The first thing students do in this test, and thousands or tens of thousands of students take this test, the first thing they do is write a 25-minute essay on a specific topic. The topic on the last test for December was, should we know about something we can't do anything about? In other words, if you can't do anything about something, is it worth knowing about it at all, or should you remain totally ignorant of it? I couldn't believe that was actually an essay topic. So I just wanted to mention that. Okay, so Jeff Steinberg, on a different topic, Jeff Steinberg, several days ago, if I got this right, he mentioned on Wednesday that he recently interviewed 40 congressmen, if I got that number right, and all of them, according to Jeff, all of them agreed that there's an impending financial crisis. None of them apparently agreed that they would do anything about it, which is pretty disturbing. I've also noticed in the recent LPAC articles, there seems to be a more intensively critical attitude towards the Congress, given that this economic collapse really does seem to be upon us, given, for example, the meltdown of the high-yield bond market, which is going to have other repercussions in the credit markets, the continuous death spiral of the price of oil, which has to eventually hit some energy companies, and I expect an energy company to default soon.
Yes.
The decrease in commodities prices, which is wiping out small farmers, and another one that stands out is the impending $3 billion default on the bonds that Ukraine, the money that Ukraine owes Russia, and which seems to be a political attack on Russia as well, because I don't see the IMF stepping up to help Ukraine pay that $3 billion debt. So my question to you is our attitude towards Congress the same? I mean, is the position vis-a-vis Congress, given that there seems to be a recognition that some of these guys are completely worthless, is it exactly the same? Does it really make sense to continue to phone Congress at this point? Or should we get to the point where we study the impeachment problem, not only for the president, but for certain members of Congress as well?
We have to immediately clean up the Congress and the presidency. The presidency in its present form is satanic. In this quality of the presidency as being satanic is taken from Obama, because Obama kills people who are innocent people every Tuesday. It's a mass killing by the president that most people in the organization, leading figures, major newspapers in Manhattan, for example, will not tell the truth. Why? Because some of their leading editors have been threatened by assassination if they continue to talk about what they knew. So we don't have the guts to throw Obama out of power. And that's what has to be done. Then we have to go with Trump or Bump or whatever you want to call him. And that's one of the things that should be it should go down the toilet drain to get rid of that. But what's happened is the practices of the U.S. government under the Bush family, should we call it the Bush dynasty, and that has been a tragedy. And then we have the Obama administration, and that has been satanic. What we're dealing with now is actually satanic forces are governing the United States behavior, in the official behavior. Satanic forces. When we look in terms of Europe, the French have a very poor standard of morality. It's understandable. It wasn't the French as such. It was that the people from the original warfare of the 20th century, where the French population was very corrupted. And it has remained with corruption, with struggles among the French to free themselves from this miasma they're subjected to. The problem is we have to fight, and it's a dubious fight in the sense there's no guarantee before us. We have to impose a standard which fits the Alexander Hamilton standard, the standard of the future, and that has to be brought into charge. In other words, the only solution now is we've got to bring Alexander Hamilton's policy into the foremost characteristics of the U.S. policy. But that is only a basis for going into the future of mankind, because mankind is going to be doing things in space and other things to come in times to come, and new discoveries. What we have is a possibility of having some kind of society in parts of Asia with some missing parts. And the problem is we have is the transatlantic period. The transatlantic region of the planet has gone into a plunge of this self-destruction and corruption. And we have to recognize that these are the problems that face us. And we have to understand that we must stand up and say, we've got to clean the thing out. We have to bring in standards of behavior which fit our American tradition and its best characteristics. And without that, we're in a disaster. And it's going to be a fight to do that, but it's the fight which is necessary. The necessary fight. And we have to get rid of Obama. We have to clean the British Empire put it down the toilet train or something like that. But what we need to do is use the best of our conscience, which all of us who have some degree of excellence in that respect. And we have to impose a standard of belief which is consistent with the principle of humanity and the progress of humanity. It's a tough fight. It's a necessary fight.
Thank you.
My name is Donald Adams, and I want to wish you a happy afternoon. Enjoy. On the fireside chat, I said that we have in the Oval Office, we have an anti-Roosevelt. But we have a tradition of Washington, Hamilton, FDR, and Lincoln, and the tradition of our Constitution. Our Constitution, Obama every Tuesday thumbs his nose at it. He becomes in effect an enemy of the Constitution, an enemy of the everyone in this time in the United States. Mm-hmm. As such, shouldn't he enjoy the wrath of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Pentagon?
Well, the issue you're talking about is the British influence. Obama, the president, current president, and the Bushes who preceded before that, are all enemies of the United States. That is, the enemies of the principle of the United States. The Bushes, every Bush that was ever elected to highest office, and Obama have been in increasing degrees, and Obama's the worst. Obama is a satanic figure, period. It's the only way to fairly identify him. And he and the British, because Obama was an agent, created as an agent of the British monarchy. And he's running the United States. And he was brought in there by the British family, the British royal family. And that's and the Bushes were doing the same thing. the Bush family in office was evil too. Look, remember the young Bush member who tried to assassinate the president, President Reagan. And he'd had a long time in recovery because the series, the wounds that he occurred. So therefore, we have been, in the United States, we have been subjected to forces which are not of our own nature, but forces of evil forces, which are contrary to everything the United States represents. That is in nature. We have made many mistakes in the history of our government, our presidency. Most of our presidents who were elected were bad choices. Seriously bad choices. The first 7 cases, bad choices. And this is the kind of thing we've gone through. Finally, we have to come to reality. Finally, we should say we are adults. We should have knowledge which is sufficient to impose a standard of reason which fits our nation's history. But unfortunately, the history is covered with people who shouldn't have ever been president. Most of the presidents of the United States were not worthy of being presidents, but far from that. And we have to recognize that thing. And we have to say, somehow we've got to fight back and say, our nation is important not only for us, our nation is responsible for the behavior of the United States during its whole span of existence so far. We have to impose that standard. We, the people, have to impose that standard. Then things will work. But what's happened so far is the British Empire, who is the master of Obama, has dominated the presidency so much that the average citizen of the United States has difficulty in recognizing what a citizen of the United States is.
So what's the solution? I know what the solution is, but how do you do it? How do you come by doing it?
I spent a lot of effort on that question.
Hi, Mr. LaRouche. This is Eugene from the Bronx, New York. How are you?
I'm not too bad. I hope.
I would like to ask you, you've been saying that climate change and global warming, as was propagated by Al Gore and Cameron and Britain, that it's a fraud, that it's not really true. But we've been having many days of 70 degrees, the warmest December on record in New York, for example, and I guess in New Jersey too. Is this any indication that there may be some type of climate change or global warming, or does it have nothing to do with that? Is it just something like a freakish weather that has occurred, due to other conditions, to tornadoes in the West, to a mass of cold air that has been blocked from coming in to these areas? I just want to know, is this any indication of any climate change or global warming, or does it have nothing to do with that?
No, I would say in general, the idea of global warming as some kind of synthetic development or some influence development is not really relevant. And the point is, we are living on Earth. We're living under the reign of a galaxy or a series of galaxies, and those galaxies themselves is a very complicated set of galaxies. It's not just a galaxy, it's a series of galaxies. And there are higher forms of influences in terms of the planet Earth's experience as well. So these things are not all what they call. First of all, the usual exposition of argument on the question of global warming is criminal. It is not just a mistake. It's a deliberately criminal activity. There is no such thing. In other words, there is change in the climate. The changes occur under a certain lawful process. But what they're talking about in terms of global change, global warming, the global warming thing is a fraud. It's a hoax. There are changes, but the changes are lawful in the sense that we're in a galactical system, not just but a galactical system. And the galactical system has changes. But what is presented by the Pope and other criminals, and he is a criminal, is a lie. There are changes, but they are of a different nature than these liars, of the British liars and their accomplices, would ever want to represent. There is a problem in change, but the problem is not of the nature that's given. And the main thing you have to do is you want to eliminate the people who are trying to eliminate the climate.
Okay, thank you, Mr. LaRouche. Now I understand it better. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, hello, hi. My name is Ray Martino here. My question is here because on the financial issue, like we had a crisis in 2008 and we're expecting another tremendous and final breakdown of the whole issue. Now, because of the way congressmen and senators probably all have their hands in Wall Street trying to scrap the last bit of financial gain they can possibly get. Now, when it finally collapses, there's nothing less like the Great Depression '33. Does it probably have to take that much of a collapse of the financial system because it's based on Wall Street that is not based on the economy per se. So if that does finally collapse, would it be easier now to revert to the Glass-Steagall Act at that time when the devastation has occurred? Because they're interested in grabbing every last cent they can grab out of that Wall Street gambling casino act there. No respect to man or people or taxpayers or anything. So due to that, will it take that much? Is it coming to that head now?
Okay. Well, first of all, the first thing we should do is we should shut down Wall Street and shut down all Wall Street operations. Now, that means that they don't exist anymore. What happens is then we use a credit system, which was I think that Alexander Hamilton utilized, and we just clean the decks, go back to immediately Franklin Roosevelt's policies before the FBI got in there. When the FBI got into there and taking over from Roosevelt, then the Roosevelt administration began to deteriorate. But that was not Franklin's problem. That was the problem of the FBI and what was behind the FBI. Now, if we wanted to clean the thing up, I would do it with some degree of technical authority, and say, shut down everything that is under the FBI or the financial system, speculating system. Shut it down. Don't pay them. That means that these skyscrapers in Manhattan, most of these skyscrapers go bankrupt. Now, what we would do in New York City and around it, we would use some of these buildings and so forth. And I had some experience with this thing, so I know how it works. And therefore, we simply would organize a system of credit, like Franklin Roosevelt's system of credit coming out of the Depression. And we would use that means to take the emptied buildings of Wall Street. We would clean them up. We would reassign those buildings to be improved in terms of their quality and function. and we would put people to work in jobs which would be skilled jobs. That is the option. We have to bankrupt everybody who is part of that problem, of the Wall Street and similar problem. Just shut them down. Don't give them any money and accuse them of crimes, because they are committing crimes. And we eliminate those crimes. And Wall Street has been stealing from us, the United States, and from other parts of the world consistently, ever since Roosevelt left his function.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi, Lynn. It's Kay from the Bronx. I want to add a comment to what you said in the beginning. Robert Scheinfeld says, "We are infinite beings come here to play." I don't know if anybody's having any fun, but that is what he says. I'm just adding that to the thoughts that you expressed in the beginning about us being part of the galaxy. You spoke on your Wednesday Q&A program about George Washington coming up the, was it Potomac, Delaware River?
Yeah, right.
Yes. And there's such a famous painting showing him standing there looking very successful. I wanted to ask you if there is, that at that moment created a shift, which you explained. It didn't end the war, but it was a remarkable shift. Do you see such a shift coming in the next even several days that will give us added time beyond January 1st to win the war of minds?
Well, what my scheme was on this question is we have two events, musical events, respectively on Saturday and Sunday of the past period, past weekend. And I would say that that standard, if continued and projected as continued, would inspire people in the Manhattan area immediately to create an infectious kind of change in the mood of people in that part of Manhattan and in their similar areas. And that is something which is in and of itself is extremely important. I paid great attention to what happened on Saturday in terms of Sunday, in terms of these two events which occurred in the most recent week. And I've seen what the effect is. Now, you may want to, some people may want to have some criticism about some of these effects, but that's not so good. What's good is that there were certain problems, there always are when you're trying to make a renaissance, shall we say, of music and performance. But as an attempt in a renaissance, these developments were intrinsically, essentially valid. We would like to improve on these things, these kinds of dimensions, and we can do that. It's going to take more rehearsals and more practice in order to get those higher values. And I'm sure that for coming period will demand those kinds of changes happening there, and what happened Saturday and Sunday. But we're looking for what's going to come as better after that time. We have people who are drawn out of almost drawn out of business, and they came back into business and began to do the kind of work to influence the kind of musical performances which are required. We can do better, and we should be intentional to do it better. And our intention is to provide the population of not only Manhattan, but of the United States, a higher quality of standard, of experience, of music, and art, and science. And we had good examples. I was pleased with them on Saturday and on Sunday. I was pleased. But it's not good enough. Therefore, we've got to enhance what we did in Saturday and Sunday. We've got to enhance that, and we've got to make the enhancement of that the next step. And that's the way to inspire a population to spread the good word and inspire the population to undertake a higher and better mechanism of developing art, the kind of art which enriches the mind. And I think it did, because I was watching this very closely in both cases, Saturday and Sunday. And it can be improved, but this was good, essentially good. And we're glad to have it, very good. Now we want better.
I was to the Sunday performance, and I totally agree with you. The classical music has a very uplifting effect on the mentality of the society. And I was very, very happy I went there, and I found it a remarkable performance. And I look forward to it even being better, as you say it's going to be.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And I think that's the last of our questions for today. And I don't really think I'll say anything more, because what you just said, the only thing I would add is that, look, that's the whole point of the Manhattan Project. The defining conceptions are coming from you, then we figure these things out. Like what you were saying to Marcel about Brunelleschi. He's saying, okay, I'm teaching these classes, Shakespeare, and you say, well, Brunelleschi, because Shakespeare is not a dramatist. Shakespeare is a humanist, so to speak. He has a concepts of humanity. But I just would ask you if you have a summary. I think maybe you just did, for what you already said really what I guess we're going to do next. So I'm sort of asking if there's anything else, and if there isn't, we can close.
I would say just briefly, first of all, the important thing to do is to get an education based on the work of Brunelleschi. Brunelleschi was the first modern scientist, and he was unique in this respect. He had two rivals, and the two rivals were sitting there watching themselves, scratching their back and scratching whatever else, and they just weren't accomplishing anything. Where Brunelleschi was the most creative mind in science in the history of mankind up to this point, the greatest. And everybody else depended upon what Brunelleschi did. And anyone who wants to study that material, or the history of Brunelleschi's work, would get a very good and shocking education, because it's something that very few people today understand at all. And therefore, I think the question of Brunelleschi and his achievement is something which ought to be on the platform of every consideration of this nature.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's a good Christmas present for everybody to ponder. And we'll see you next week.